Hey girl, you're tuned into the Grace Code podcast. I'm your host Lisa, and this is a show all about unlocking Jesus in the everyday. What's the everyday? Well, it's things like your faith, career, relationships, health, and so much more. I pray that this podcast leaves you inspired and passionate to find Jesus as you go about your everyday and encourages you to step out of your comfort zone and step into the things that God is calling you to. Hey girl, and welcome to episode 2 of the Grace Code. I'm your host Lisa, and I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has sent through some form of encouragement, has followed along over Instagram, has subscribed to the podcast, and just thank you for sticking with me and tuning in over the past few weeks. I appreciate you all so much. This journey into the world of podcasting has honestly been so daunting for me, but as I keep telling a few of my friends, it can only go up from here. So thank you for just being here and for sticking it out with me, and I can't wait to see what God does with this. Now, if you haven't already, make sure you go and check out my previous episodes because I share a little more info about who I am and my heart all behind the Grace Code. Now, let's get into today's episode. You know, I was really torn about whether or not I should produce this episode. I actually recorded it a while ago, but kept umming and ahhing over it, so decided to re-record it. The main reason for this is because so many people are just over isolation and turning on the news and hearing all about Corona. But God challenged me to share something positive out of this whole situation. You might have seen from the podcast title that today's episode is all about some of the lessons I've taken away from this time in isolation. So I originally recorded this back in June, July, when Melbourne had just come out of what we thought was going to be our only time in lockdown. Oh, how we were wrong. While we managed to have, a few weeks of catching up with friends and family, it wasn't too long until we were told we were headed back into 6 weeks of stage 3 restrictions. But that wasn't the end of it for us here in Melbourne. No, 2 weeks into that lot of isolation, we were told, hey, this isn't going well, so we're actually putting you into stage 4 restrictions for another 6 weeks. So I think we're up to week 3 of 8 weeks, maybe. To be honest, weeks are just turning into 1. So I honestly have no idea of time or days of the week at the moment. So speaking to so many people at the moment, the hardest thing about these restrictions is the social isolation from family and friends, especially for those who live alone. So if that is you, please know that I'm praying for you. If you ever need to chat, feel free to reach out to me over on Instagram at the.gracecode. I'm always so excited and happy to meet some of you over in my DMs. So, make sure you come and say hi. Now, I just want to preface this whole episode by saying that, everyone has walked and is walking through this season so differently. Some people coped really well, some who are close to me struggled a lot, and others have had it really, really tough. So whatever side you fall into, know that it's okay to feel and deal with this however you need to. Please know that I'm not coming on here saying I've had it worse than some, and I'm definitely not coming on here to say that I'm better than some people because I may have coped well in this season. Because in all honesty, I've had my moments when I've really struggled, even as an introvert, because, everyone assumes introverts love the quiet, they love being by themselves, they love being in books, they love just, time to themselves. And while all that is true, because that's how we recharge, there comes a point when we're like, we need people, we need socialization as well, okay? So just get us around people. And I've come to that moment quite a few times, but ultimately I'm simply coming on here to share what I've learned during this time, hoping to encourage you to know that it is possible to thrive and what that might actually look like. Now, I'll be straight up with you. I have been pretty blessed that I didn't struggle as much as others I know did during this first lot of restrictions that we were placed in. You know, this season has been really devastating for some people, and my heart aches for those who have struggled. There are people who have lost their incomes and others who have, heartbreakingly lost loved ones. So what we can continue to do is pray that this virus is eradicated, because, this season is not from God, but He can use it for good, even if we don't see it right now. I think this time has definitely reframed the thinking of so many people, whether it be the way they run their business, their household, or even how they work within someone else's organization. I know so many organizations now have been able to bring in full-time work from home strategies for their employees. And now that they have this framework in place, their employees are now able to continue to work from home long into the future. And this is so great for people who are looking for that kind of balance in their lives, like families or those that have to travel a good hour and a half to the city and back each and every day to get to work. And they now have these opportunities to create a little bit of work-life balance, which is really amazing. So I do think that there is some good coming out of this season. We might just need to dig a little deeper to find it. For me, during this season, I didn't learn a lot in the sense of how I can work in my business better and improve the way I run it. I actually learned more about the way I cope with things, my strengths, my weaknesses, and I've been able to walk away with a strategy to, challenge myself when I'm feeling like I'm in a lull in life. So, let's dive into the things that I've learned, and I pray that this really encourages you to seek out Jesus no matter what your everyday may look like right now. So get your pens and journals ready, girls, because I'm going to run through 5 lessons that I have learned during this season of, isolation. So lesson number 1 that I have learned is to be a better friend by showing up. What does that mean? The only type of girl you should be is the one who finds strength and comfort in who you are because you know who you are in Christ. So, be the girl who shows up. Be the girl who shows up for her family. Be the girl who shows up for her friends. Be the girl who shows up to serve. Be the girl who wakes up with purpose and intent in her heart. Be the girl who never gives up. Be the girl who believes all things are possible. Be the girl who finds strength and comfort in who you are because you know whose you are. I think all of us can be a better friend no matter the situation. The first 3 weeks of our first stint in isolation, I was in this creative block and was pretty deflated because of it. I didn't really feel like myself, and honestly, I wasn't actually dreading this season like others were. I was not dreading isolation at all. I was kind of looking forward to it, and I looked forward to stopping, and I looked forward to rest, and I looked forward to catching my breath. But this block that I had really stopped me in my tracks because it was so unexpected. I went in thinking that I was going to use this time to leisurely focus on my business, get creative, write up some blog posts, do some photography. Instead, I literally just stopped because my brain wouldn't work and I played Animal Crossing. Yes, friends, I am an Animal Crossing fan, so don't judge me. Now, during those first few weeks, I probably wasn't a very good friend. I didn't text my friends as much. I didn't really call them. I don't think I texted or called anyone but my mum, to be honest. However, I had friends that were the better friend to me. They were texting me, they were calling me, they were checking in on me. So when I came out of that lull, I was then able to flip the role and be the better friend to them, because that's how friendships work. You're not all going to be happy and loving life at the same time. Some of you are going to be up while others are going to be down. So when you're up, take that step and be that better friend and show up for them. I was dealing with a situation a while back and was given some of the best advice I had ever heard, which was to love offensively, because someone can't get offended while you're loving them. Think about it. I think this is just so spot on. If you're offended by someone's love, girl, check your heart. And if someone is offended by your love, you know what? That falls on them, because how can you be offended by love? So to people that have friends in their life that may have put you to the test during this time, know that that's actually a really toxic trait. Friends don't sit back and just wait for you to approach them with no valid reason, i.e. if they're not sick or struggling in some way, and they don't give you a time limit in which to contact them. So, they don't say something along the lines of, hey, if you don't contact me and check in on me in the next 2 days, then you're a bad friend. If they're your friend, why would they put you in this position? And if they have, still love them. Love them until you're blue in the face. But maybe it's time to reevaluate the balance of that friendship, because it shouldn't be a power struggle. On the other hand, also come from a place that if they haven't reached out to check on you, maybe take that step and check in on them and see what they are going through. There are a lot of silent battles that people are going through, and this time of isolation has really brought that out. And many times it's in the people who we least expect it to be in. So maybe you are struggling, and if you're not hearing from some of your friends right now, know that you're not alone. Maybe your friends are also struggling. So why don't you just pick up that phone, send them a text, reach out to them, check in on them. It may open up a conversation where you can both share how you're feeling and coping during this time. Try to dig deep and get yourself out of your feelings and be the better friend during this time. I know it can be so hard sometimes, but you've got this girl because you've got God on your side. So be that friend who shows up, reach out, and love them offensively. Now on to number 2, and I actually love this one so much. It's be generous always in all ways. There's no time like the present to be generous, whether it's donating some money, giving up of your time, or, buying someone groceries. Step out and do something for someone else during this season. And you know what? Why not make it a regular thing that you do? Studies show that generosity actually leads to greater joy, happiness, and fulfillment in our lives. And it's been so wonderful. I've really personally loved hearing so many stories of people being so generous during this time. And it brings on this amazing chain reaction. You hear about people delivering groceries for one another, doing someone else's shopping, donating items to food banks. And I think it showed just how much people really do love community and really do love each other. I was on Facebook the other day and I saw this video, and honestly, it warmed my heart so much. I had tears. So it was this delivery driver had gone to deliver a package to someone's house. And the guy that lived in the house ran to the door and was like, hey, hold up. See all these envelopes on my door? They've got questions in them. So if you pick one and you get the answer right, you get what's inside. So each envelope the driver chose, he got the answer right and he was able to keep what was inside. Little did he know that there was actually money inside, and this driver ended up with over $100 in tips, and he was so speechless because he had no idea how he was going to be paying his rent that week. And bang, there it was in his hand just for delivering a package to a man. How beautiful is that? Another great thing I watched earlier in this isolation season was on YouTube, and it was a show called Some Good News. I don't know if any of you watched it, but if you haven't, look it up. Make sure you have some tissues ready, because I low-key bawled my eyes out during this show, but it really made me stop and think about just how much good actually is happening in this season. By being generous, not only is it going to make someone else's day, but it actually makes yours as well. How much joy do you get when you give someone a birthday gift? How much joy is there on Christmas morning? And you can be doing this every day. So don't you want to make someone else's day by being a part of their miracle? I sure do. I love being able to be someone's answer to prayer, whether it's helping them financially, buying them a meal, filling up their car with petrol. It can be a little thing. It doesn't need to be this gigantic gesture. Even just, sending a bunch of flowers to someone. Imagine that randomly happening to you. How much better is it going to be if you get to do it for somebody else? So that was number 2. We're now on to number 3. So the third thing I have learned during this time is that our language matters. There is such a difference between physically distancing ourselves and socially distancing ourselves. I feel like language has played such an important role throughout this pandemic. I honestly wished they called these distancing measures physical distancing rather than social distancing. As humans, we crave connection. We're made for community. So it's not normal to be stuck inside the same four walls day in, day out, months on end. No wonder why so many of us are struggling with anxiety, with other health problems, because this is not what we're created for. We are created to be social beings. I said it earlier, I'm an introvert, but even I've started to climb the walls of my house a little bit, and I just need a little more social interaction that goes beyond my husband and dog. It's completely normal and it's completely fine to feel that way because we're made for community. During our first lockdown season, I found so many people actually put up these social boundaries as they were putting up physical boundaries. So many of them weren't answering phone calls, they weren't jumping onto Zoom calls, and they just separated and isolated themselves. And what they didn't realize was that soon enough, we were going to be meeting again in person. And the issue that arose was that while people kept connected over this time, there was a bond formed between them. It's well known in psychology that there is a bond formed during trauma. So once meetings started up again, these people were closer to each other in friendship because they'd been through something together. They've been through an experience that bonded them together, and they've been able to rely on each other and count on each other and talk with each other during this time. So if, like me, you are still in isolation where you are while you're listening to this, it's time to step out of your comfort zone and jump on that next Zoom call with your camera on, because I know there is so many of you listening today that jump into these meetings with your video off because you're in your PJs and your hair's messy. You know what? It doesn't matter. Get out of your comfort zone. Turn that camera on. Something even better you can do is organize a Zoom meeting with your friends yourself. We actually organized dinner over the Zoom where we all ordered the same food, we ate and chatted for hours, and then on another Zoom call, we played a bunch of online games, which was really fun. And now we will come out of this season with these great, funny memories rather than the stress of the situation we were currently in at that time. Another way to step out of your comfort zone is just to pick up the phone and have a conversation with someone rather than sending them a text message. Zoom and text fatigue is real friend. So start tearing down the social barriers that you may have built up so that when restrictions finally start to lift again, and they will, you still have the bonds and relationships with people that you did prior to this time. For sure, I have loved the slower pace to life that this time has brought me. I've loved the lack of the word busy in my life, and it really allowed me to cultivate my time to pursue new things. I've been able to carve out and spend moments with God, diving deeply into His Word during this time, and it's been honestly so incredibly amazing. But we are created to have a social aspect to our lives, to be around people. We are created for relationship. So if there's one thing I would encourage you to do, it is to keep cultivating those moments with the Lord, but also be cultivating them with your family and friends as well. Okay, so on to number 4, and this one is a good one, girls. It's okay if productivity looked different in this season. Your value and worth don't come from your productivity, but from God. Whew, let that one sink in for a minute. You don't need to use this time to hustle and start a business or tick off your fitness goals. If you need to stop and rest, then stop and rest. I'm here to give you permission to rest. We need it. God gave it to us, so do it. You don't need to be fitting into someone else's timeline. These days, whenever we have a free moment, we're told to hustle, have a side business, keep busy, because if we're not busy, we're lazy. This hustle culture that has been created is honestly so ridiculous. And I'm going to talk about it more in another episode, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I actually came across a meme just the other day that said, when you rest, you rust. It made me so frustrated that because something like this exists, people will absorb it and believe that they're falling behind or that they're lazy if they decide to stop, take a break, and rest. Let's remember 2 things here, girls. Number 1, you can't get behind on God's good and perfect plan for your life. Number 2, you can't function in the gifts God has given to you if you're exhausted and burnt out. So let's get rid of this idea of the hustle, because grace will take you places hustling can't. And that, friend, is a small, unintentional insight into one of the future episodes of the Grace Code. So if you're keen for that, make sure you've hit subscribe because you don't want to miss it. Now, in saying all of this, it doesn't mean resting forever. Take the time you need, then slowly get back into your routine. And if you need to set yourself a new one, then do it. That way, when life does eventually get back to some form of normality, you're well rested, you're recharged, and you're ready to get back into it. Now, my final lesson that I've learned during this time of isolation is one that, I've always known and I've always felt is really important, but I just wanted to emphasize it again today. And that is mental health matters. I said earlier that many of us were able to cope during this time. However, a lot of us didn't cope well, and that's so okay. The important thing is that you recognize this and start to put things in place to support yourself. Self-care and soul care are more important than ever, and this may look like seeking out professional counseling or therapy. And that's okay if you need it. There is no shame in asking for help. If you're in Australia, head to your GP and tell them how you're feeling and ask for a mental health plan. This will give you some free to low-cost sessions to see a professional who can help you during this time. We also have some really amazing organizations that have services available via online chat and over the phone, and they are there ready and waiting and willing to help you. So please go and check them out. They include Beyond Blue, the Butterfly Foundation, Lifeline, and Headspace. You can find their details in the description of this episode. I'm going to pop them in there. So if you need to seek counseling, please do it, because there's nothing more important than your safety and mental health during this time. It's so important to put the things in place now to support you from here on in. One thing I needed during this time was rest, and was to work through the creative block that I was having. And at the start of our very first lockdown, a lot of fear and anxiety began to creep back into my life. And it's been something that I've dealt with for a really long time. And I just stopped and thought, you know what? This isn't what God wants me to feel during this time. So I turned off the news, I blocked the news sites from my phone, I unfollowed people on social media that weren't speaking positively, and I shifted my focus solely onto God and what He wanted to do in my life during this time. And this podcast is part of what came out of that time I spent with Him. Some other great things for self-care can be taking a bath instead of a shower, popping on some worship or some other soothing music and just sit and take it in. Taking a moment and resting in God's presence, your own presence, and just in the day itself. Sometimes it's really important to take our focus off everything going on externally around us and bring it back to what is happening in the now, in this present moment. And this can really stop any anxiety or fear you may be feeling, because it stops the exaggerated thoughts that go on in our mind. It stops the what ifs, and it brings you back to the now, to the present moment, to the fact, to what is actually happening. So there are my 5 lessons that I have learned during this time in isolation. Now we're about to wrap up the episode, but I have one more bonus lesson that I want to share with you, and that is look for Jesus in the everyday. That's what this podcast is all about. So I want to encourage you to open your eyes and look for Him in creation, in the small things, in the details as you go about your day, and in the moments of rest that you get. Take out your Bible and read a few scriptures throughout the day. He is there waiting. Use this time to cultivate a more intimate relationship with Him. So one thing to think about as we come to a close on this episode is, on the other side of this pandemic, what's one thing or something that you will let go of that you won't be picking back up again? For me, it's probably this notion of always having to be busy and giving myself permission to rest. I bought into the hustle culture that I spoke about earlier, and slowly I'm breaking out of it. So it's okay if I'm unproductive for a couple of hours because I want to watch TV or I want to play Animal Crossing. I have workaholic tendencies once I get going. So it's learning to pull back and take a break when I need it. And I feel that there are so many of you out there that are exactly the same. So ask yourself, what is that one thing that on the other side of this pandemic, you're going to let go of and not pick back up? I'm going to drop this question in my Insta stories, so make sure you head over there and leave your answer because I want to know what you're going to leave behind. And that's a wrap, friends. Thanks so much for joining me this week. I hope you've taken away something from the lessons that I learned during this time in lockdown because of COVID-19. As always, my Insta DMs are open, so please head on over, come and say hi, come and introduce yourself, as I would love to get to know you. Now, make sure you tune in next Wednesday as I turn the tables on Sylvia from Tear the Veil and interview her. It's funny, it's real, it's raw, and you'll learn so much about her journey and her heart behind the blog Tear the Veil. So I'll catch you then, and I hope you have a beautifully blessed week. Thanks so much for joining us this week on the Grace Code podcast. This show is made possible because of listeners like you. If you want to find out more about the Grace Code, head over to our Instagram at the.gracecode and say hello. If you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode, and be sure to tune in next Wednesday when we drop our next show. Until then, have a beautifully blessed week.